The worst part wasn't waking up in a stranger's bed wearing yesterday's scrubs. It wasn't even the fact that she was 30,000 feet in the air when she was supposed to be home in her apartment, finally getting some sleep after a brutal double shift. No, the worst part was the look of complete shock on the handsome man's face when he found her curled up in what she now realized was definitely not a medical transport jet. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl that would have been charming under different circumstances. "But who exactly are you and why are you sleeping in my cabin?" Tiana Johnson sat up so fast her head spun, her dark curls a mess around her face. The luxurious leather seat beneath her was nothing like the basic medical equipment she'd expected to find. Instead of monitors and oxygen tanks, she was surrounded by polished wood panels, soft lighting, and what looked like a fully stocked bar. "Oh my God," she whispered, her brown eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, this isn't the med-flight jet." The man, tall, blonde, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, crossed his arms and studied her with curious blue eyes. "Med-flight? Ma'am, this is a Hayes Industries aircraft. I'm Preston Hayes and you're supposed to be." Tiana scrambled to her feet, smoothing down her rumpled navy scrubs. Her hospital ID badge swung against her chest as she moved, and she noticed Preston's eyes flick to it. "I'm Tiana Johnson. I'm a nurse at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. I was supposed to catch a medical transport to Houston for a patient transfer, but there was this mix-up with the flights, and I was so tired I could barely think straight, and—" "Slow down," Preston said, holding up a hand. His expression had shifted from suspicious to concerned. "You said Houston? We're heading to Dallas." "Dallas." Tiana felt her knees go weak. "Dallas, Texas? That would be the one." Preston moved to a nearby intercom system and pressed a button. "James? Could you come back here for a minute?" A man in a pilot's uniform appeared within seconds, his face professional but slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, Mr. Hayes?" "James, meet Tiana Johnson. She seems to think she was supposed to be on a medical transport flight. Any idea how she ended up on my jet instead?" The pilot's face went pale. "Oh dear. Miss Johnson, I think there's been a terrible mistake. We received a call about a passenger pickup at the private aviation terminal. The person said they had someone who needed to get to Texas urgently. I assumed they meant you were our passenger." Tiana sank back into the leather seat, burying her face in her hands. "This is a nightmare. I have patients depending on me. I was supposed to accompany Mrs. Rodriguez to Houston for her surgery. She's been waiting months for this opportunity and now—" "Hey." Preston's voice was gentler now, and she felt the seat dip as he sat down across from her. "We'll figure this out. James, how long until we land?" "About 2 hours, sir. We're past the point of no return now, especially with the weather system moving through the southeast. Even if we turned around, we wouldn't make it back to Atlanta tonight." Tiana looked up at Preston through her fingers. "Your pilot is saying I'm stuck on your private jet for 2 hours, flying to a city I never intended to visit, while my patient is probably panicking about her surgery tomorrow?" "That's about the size of it, yes." Preston ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way that made him look more human. "But like I said, we'll figure this out. James, once we land, can you arrange for Miss Johnson to get back to Atlanta as soon as possible?" "I'll do my best, sir, but with the storms?" James looked apologetic. "It might be morning before anything's flying." Tiana felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd been working 18-hour days for the past week, covering for colleagues who were out sick. She was exhausted, worried about her patients, and now completely out of her element in this world of private jets and expensive suits. "I need to call the hospital," she said, reaching for her phone. "They need to know what happened." Preston watched as she dialed, her fingers shaking slightly. He couldn't help but notice how dedicated she seemed to her work, even in this impossible situation. Most people would be worried about themselves, but her first concern was for her patients. "Dr. Martinez? It's Tiana. I'm so sorry, but there's been a huge mix-up." She explained the situation quickly, her voice professional despite the circumstances. "Yes, I understand. Please tell Mrs. Rodriguez that I'll be back as soon as possible. Maybe Dr. Patterson can accompany her instead?" As she hung up, Preston could see the stress written across her face. "Everything okay?" "They're handling it, but Mrs. Rodriguez specifically requested me because I speak Spanish and she's nervous about the surgery. She doesn't trust easily." Tiana slumped in her seat. "I've been working with her for months to get her comfortable with this procedure." "You really care about your patients," Preston observed. "Of course I do. That's why I became a nurse." She looked at him as if the question was strange. Don't you care about your work? It was such a simple question, but it hit Preston harder than expected. When was the last time he'd felt genuinely passionate about his business empire? When had he last felt like he was making a real difference in someone's life? Yes, of course, he said, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. Tiana studied his face for a moment, then seemed to shake herself. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap at you. This whole situation is it's a lot. You don't need to apologize. This isn't your fault. Preston stood up and moved to a small refrigerator. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee? You look like you could use some caffeine. Coffee would be amazing, actually. I've been up for... God, what time is it? She checked her phone. 22 hours. I picked up an extra shift because we're short-staffed. Preston handed her a steaming mug of what smelled like expensive coffee, nothing like the hospital break room brew she was used to. 22 hours? That sounds dangerous. Welcome to nursing, Tiana said with a tired laugh. We do what we have to do. As she sipped the coffee, Preston found himself studying her more closely. Even exhausted and stressed, there was something striking about her. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she definitely was, with warm brown skin, expressive dark eyes, and natural curls that caught the cabin's soft lighting. It was the way she carried herself, the genuine concern in her voice when she talked about her patient, the fact that she was more worried about others than her own impossible situation. So, he said, settling back into his seat. Tiana Johnson, ICU nurse, fluent in Spanish, dedicated to the point of working 22-hour shifts. What else should I know about my unexpected travel companion? Tiana raised an eyebrow. That depends. Preston Hayes, I'm assuming you own Hayes Industries? Private jet owner, expensive suit wearer. What should I know about you? Fair enough. Preston smiled, and Tiana noticed it transformed his whole face. I inherited the company from my father. We do mostly real estate development and investment. I split my time between Atlanta and Dallas, though I spend more time in boardrooms than I'd like. Inherited. Tiana took another sip of coffee. So you never chose this life? The question was more perceptive than Preston had expected. Not really, no. It was always assumed I'd take over the family business. And you never wanted to do something else? Like? She gestured around the luxurious cabin. I don't know, become a pilot? Travel the world? Be a teacher? Preston laughed, but it was tinged with something that might have been regret. A teacher? I never even considered it. Why not? You seem smart enough. Thanks for the vote of confidence. But Hayes men don't become teachers. We build empires. Tiana set down her coffee cup and looked at him seriously. That sounds lonely. Before Preston could respond, James's voice came over the intercom. We're beginning our descent into Dallas, folks. Should be on the ground in about 30 minutes. As the jet began to descend, Preston found himself wishing the flight was longer. There was something about Tiana's direct way of talking, her obvious compassion, that was unlike anyone in his usual social circle. She saw past the money and the status to ask real questions about what he actually wanted from life. So what happens when we land? Tiana asked, breaking into his thoughts. Well, I was planning to head to my family's ranch outside the city. I have some business meetings tomorrow, but... He paused, an idea forming. You know what? Let me make some calls. I have connections with private aviation companies. I might be able to get you back to Atlanta tonight. Tiana's face lit up with hope. Really? You do that? Of course. It's the least I can do, considering you're stuck in this mess because of a mix-up with my flight. As the jet touched down at Dallas Love Field, Preston was already on his phone, working his connections. But part of him, a part he didn't want to examine too closely, was hoping those connections wouldn't pan out. For the first time in months, maybe years, he was talking to someone who saw him as just a person, not a business opportunity or a social advantage. And Tiana Johnson, with her tired eyes and her fierce dedication to helping others, was the most interesting person he'd met in a very long time. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but with this storm system, we can't get anything airborne until at least tomorrow afternoon. The voice on Preston's phone was apologetic but firm. The whole southeast is socked in. Tiana watched Preston's face as he ended what had to be his fifth call in the past hour. They were sitting in the private terminal at Dallas Love Field, surrounded by leather chairs and polished marble that screamed expensive, while rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows. Let me guess, she said. Still grounded? Preston nodded, slipping his phone back into his jacket pocket. Every private charter company says the same thing. The weather system that's moving through is too dangerous for small aircraft. Tiana closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Rodriguez is going to be so scared. She's never had surgery before, and she specifically asked for me to be there because her English isn't great and she trusts me. You mentioned she speaks Spanish. Have you been her nurse long? About 6 months. She came in with chest pain and it turned out she needed a valve replacement. But she's undocumented, so getting approval for the surgery took forever. We finally found a program that would cover it. Tiana's voice was heavy with frustration. She's been so nervous about the whole thing, and now she probably thinks I abandoned her. Preston watched as Tiana pulled out her phone and started typing. What are you doing? Sending her a text in Spanish explaining what happened. Her daughter can translate for her. Tiana's thumbs flew across the screen. I know it's not the same as being there, but maybe it will help. You really go above and beyond for your patients. Tiana looked up from her phone. Don't you do the same for your, what do you call them? Clients. Preston considered this. I provide good service, sure. But what you're describing, that's personal. You actually care about these people as individuals? Of course I do. They're not just medical conditions walking around. They're people with families and fears and hopes. She studied his face. How can you run a business without caring about the people involved? It's different in my world. Everything is about numbers, profit margins, market share. You make decisions based on data, not emotions. That sounds awful. Preston laughed, though it wasn't entirely pleasant. It's profitable. But does it make you happy? The question hung in the air between them. Preston realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him about his happiness or the last time he'd even considered it himself. I should probably ask, do you have somewhere to stay tonight? He said, changing the subject. I mean, if all the flights are grounded until tomorrow? Tiana bit her lip. I hadn't really thought about it. I guess I need to find a hotel near the airport. Actually, I have a better idea. Preston stood up and grabbed his bag. My family has a ranch about an hour outside Dallas. You could stay there tonight, and tomorrow I'll make sure you get on the first available flight back to Atlanta. Oh, I couldn't. I mean, I don't want to impose on your family. You wouldn't be imposing. My grandmother lives there full-time and she loves company. Besides, it's better than spending the night in an airport hotel. Tiana hesitated. Your grandmother? Nana rose. She's 85, sharp as a tack, and she'll probably try to feed you the moment you walk in the door. Preston's voice warmed when he talked about her. She raised me after my parents died. I'm sorry about your parents. Car accident when I was 12. Nana Rose stepped in and kept the family business running until I was old enough to take over. Preston picked up Tiana's small overnight bag before she could protest. Trust me, she'll be thrilled to have a nurse in the house. She's always complaining about her blood pressure medication. As they walked toward the exit, Tiana found herself studying Preston again. The way his voice had changed when he mentioned his grandmother suggested there was more to him than the polished businessman facade. So you grew up on a ranch? She asked as they climbed into a sleek black SUV that had been waiting for them. Until I went away to college, yeah. Spent summers there even after I started working in the city. Preston started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. It's one of the few places where I can actually think clearly. What's it like? The ranch, I mean. I've never been on one. It's peaceful. About 2,000 acres of rolling hills, cattle, horses. Nana Rose keeps a vegetable garden that's bigger than most people's backyards. Preston glanced over at her. Very different from what you're used to, I imagine. I grew up in inner-city Atlanta. The closest I've been to farm animals is the petting zoo at the Children's Hospital. Tiana watched the Dallas skyline fade behind them as they drove into the countryside. But I like new experiences. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the storm clouds making the early evening sky dark and dramatic. Tiana found herself relaxing for the first time all day, the stress of the situation temporarily replaced by curiosity about where they were headed. Can I ask you something? Preston said eventually. Sure. Why nursing? I mean, it's obviously hard work, long hours, dealing with people at their worst moments. What made you choose it? Tiana was quiet for a moment, thinking. My little brother had asthma when we were kids. Really severe. He was in and out of the hospital constantly, and there was this one nurse, Miss Williams, who always took extra time with him. She'd explain what was happening, make him laugh when he was scared, stay late if he was having a bad night. She made a difference. She saved his life more than once. But more than that, she made him feel safe when he was terrified. She made our whole family feel less alone. Tiana smiled at the memory. I decided when I was 10 years old that I wanted to be like her. Is your brother okay now? He's a firefighter in Atlanta. Healthy as a horse, which the doctors said might never happen. Tiana's voice was full of pride. Miss Williams always said he was tougher than he looked. Preston found himself smiling. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She passed away a few years ago, but I still think about her every day at work. I try to be for my patients what she was for my family. They were turning off the main highway now, onto a gravel road that wound through rolling hills dotted with oak trees. In the distance, Tiana could see lights from what looked like a large house. Preston, she said suddenly, why are you being so nice to me? He glanced at her, surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, this whole situation is crazy. I accidentally got on your private jet, completely disrupted your plans, and now you're taking me to your family home for the night. Most people would have just pointed me toward the nearest hotel. Preston was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Honestly, I'm not sure. But talking to you, it's the first real conversation I've had in months. Maybe years. What do you mean, real conversation? Everyone in my world wants something from me. A business deal, an investment, an introduction to someone important. You're the first person in forever who's talked to me like I'm just a person. Tiana studied his profile in the dashboard light. Maybe that's because I don't know anything about your world. I have no idea how rich you are or how important your business is. All I know is that you're the guy whose jet I accidentally got on. And you're the nurse who cares more about her patients than her own problems. As they pulled up the long driveway toward the ranch house, Tiana could see it was beautiful, a sprawling structure with warm light spilling from numerous windows, wraparound porches, and the kind of welcoming atmosphere she'd only seen in movies. Preston, she said as he parked the car. I just want to say thank you. For helping me, for being understanding about this whole mess. I know it's not how you planned to spend your evening. Before he could respond, the front door opened and a small, energetic woman with silver hair hurried out onto the porch despite the light rain. Preston Hayes, she called out. You didn't tell me you were bringing company. Preston grinned and got out of the car. Nana Rose, meet Tiana Johnson. She's had quite an adventure today. As Tiana stepped out of the SUV, she found herself face to face with bright blue eyes that were clearly the source of Preston's, though this woman's were sparkling with curiosity and warmth. Well, aren't you just beautiful? Rose said, taking Tiana's hands in her surprisingly strong grip. And you look exhausted, honey. Come inside right now and let me fix you something to eat. Mrs.? Tiana began. Just call me Nana Rose, everyone does. Now come on, both of you, before you catch your death in this rain. As they hurried toward the house, Tiana caught Preston's eye. He was smiling in a way that made him look younger, more relaxed than she'd seen him all day. Maybe, she thought, this unexpected detour might not be such a disaster after all. The inside of the ranch house was even more welcoming than the outside, all warm wood floors, comfortable furniture, and family photos covering every surface. Tiana found herself drawn to a wall of pictures showing Preston at various ages, gap-toothed and grinning in Little League uniform, serious in a graduation cap and gown, laughing with his arm around Nana Rose at what looked like a family barbecue. That one was taken last Christmas, Rose said, noticing Tiana's attention. First time I'd seen him really smile in months. Nana Rose, Preston said with a warning tone, but he was still smiling. What? It's true. You work too much and socialize too little. Rose turned to Tiana. Now, honey, Preston mentioned you're a nurse? How wonderful. I keep telling this boy he needs more medical professionals in his life, the way he pushes himself. I work in the ICU at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Tiana said, accepting the glass of sweet tea Rose pressed into her hands. Though I have to say, this is definitely not how I expected to spend my evening. Preston told me a little about the mix-up on the drive here, Rose said, settling into an armchair with her own glass. What an adventure. Though I have to say it worked out well for me. I never get visitors anymore. I'm sure Preston visits regularly, Tiana said. Rose and Preston exchanged a look. Define regularly, Rose said dryly. I was just here 2 months ago, Preston protested. For 4 hours. To sign papers. Tiana could see this was an ongoing source of tension between them, so she changed the subject. This house is beautiful. How long has it been in your family? Preston's great-grandfather built it in 1924, Rose said, visibly brightening. Started with just the main section, but each generation has added on. Preston's father built the west wing where the library is now. Could I see the library? Tiana asked. I love books. Of course. Preston, show her around while I fix us some dinner. And don't you dare say you're not hungry, Rose added, pointing a finger at her grandson. Both of you look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in days. As Preston led her through the house, Tiana was struck by how different he seemed here. In the airplane and at the airport he'd been polished and controlled. Here, surrounded by family history and his grandmother's obvious affection, he was more relaxed, more real. Your grandmother is wonderful, she said as they entered the library, a cozy room lined floor to ceiling with books. She's the best person I know, Preston said simply. After my parents died, she could have just hired people to take care of me. Instead, she moved out here full-time and raised me herself. That must have been hard for her, giving up her life in the city. Preston paused, running his hand along the spine of an old book. I never really thought about what she gave up. I was 12 and grieving and probably pretty selfish. You were a kid who'd lost his parents. That's not selfish, that's human. They wandered through the library, and Tiana noticed the eclectic mix of titles: classic literature next to medical texts, next to romance novels, next to business books. Quite a collection, she said. Nana Rose is a voracious reader. She says books are how she travels now that her arthritis keeps her from getting around as much. Preston pulled a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice from the shelf. This was my mother's favorite. Nana Rose used to read it to me when I had nightmares. Pride and Prejudice? That's an interesting choice for nightmare comfort. Preston laughed. I know it sounds weird, but there was something soothing about the rhythm of Austen's language. And I guess even as a kid, I liked the idea that two people who seemed completely wrong for each other could end up perfect together. Tiana looked at him with new interest. You're not what I expected when I first saw you on that plane. What did you expect? Honestly? A spoiled rich guy who'd be furious about having his travel plans disrupted by some random nurse. She pulled a book from the shelf, a collection of poetry by Maya Angelou. But you've been nothing but kind, even though this whole situation is completely insane. Maybe that's because you're not what I expected either. What do you mean? Preston considered his words. Most people, when they find out who I am and what I'm worth, they change. They start acting differently, saying what they think I want to hear. You're just yourself. Well, I still don't really know what you're worth, Tiana said with a grin. For all I know, you could be completely broke and just really good at pretending. Would it matter if I was? The question surprised her. I don't know. I mean, we just met under the strangest circumstances possible. But based on the last few hours, no, I don't think it would matter. Before Preston could respond, Rose's voice carried from the kitchen. Dinner's ready, you two. The dining room table was set with what looked like everyday china but was probably worth more than Tiana's car. Rose had prepared what she called a simple meal: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden, and cornbread that smelled like heaven. Mrs. Rose, I mean Nana Rose, Tiana corrected herself quickly. This is incredible. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. Nonsense. I love cooking for people who appreciate it. Preston here barely eats when he's in the city. I eat, Preston protested. Takeout and protein bars don't count as eating, Rose said firmly. When was the last time you had a home-cooked meal? Preston thought about it. Christmas dinner here? That was 8 months ago. Tiana found herself laughing at their exchange. In nursing school, I lived on ramen and whatever was in the hospital vending machines. I completely understand the challenge of eating real food when you're working crazy hours. See? Rose said triumphantly. Tiana understands. And she probably works longer hours than you do. I worked 18 hours yesterday, Tiana said. But that was unusual. Normally it's only 12-hour shifts. Only 12 hours, Rose repeated. And how many days a week? Usually 4, but we've been short-staffed lately, so I've been picking up extra shifts. Preston did quick math in his head. That's at least 48 hours a week, sometimes more. Like I said, we do what we have to do. Tiana took a bite of the chicken and nearly moaned with pleasure. Oh my God, this is amazing. Nana Rose, you could open a restaurant. I used to cater church functions when Preston was younger, Rose said, beaming at the compliment. But tell me about your work. It must be so rewarding helping people when they're at their most vulnerable. As Tiana talked about her patients and her work, Preston found himself watching her face light up with passion. She talked about medicine the way some people talked about art or music, as if it was a calling rather than just a job. The hardest part, Tiana was saying, is when families don't understand what's happening. Medical terminology can be scary and confusing, especially if English isn't their first language. Sometimes I spend as much time translating and explaining as I do providing actual medical care. That's why you learned Spanish? Rose asked. Partly. but also because I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. My best friend in high school was Puerto Rican, and her grandmother only spoke Spanish. I learned because I wanted to be able to talk to her. That's beautiful, Rose said. Learning a language just to connect with someone. Preston realized he'd never learned anything just to connect with someone. Everything in his education had been strategic, designed to make him a better businessman. What about you, Preston? Tiana asked. Do you speak any other languages? Some French, a little German. Business languages, he said, and immediately felt how cold that sounded. Business languages? Languages that are useful for international deals, he clarified, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with how calculated his life choices sounded when viewed through Tiana's lens. After dinner, Rose insisted on giving Tiana the full tour of the house while Preston loaded the dishwasher. As their voices faded down the hallway, he found himself thinking about the evening's conversations. When was the last time he talked about books or memories or anything that wasn't related to profit margins and market strategies? When they returned to the kitchen, Tiana was carrying a small potted plant. Nana Rose is sending me home with herbs from her garden, she explained. Apparently, I look like I need more green things in my life. Everyone needs more green things, Rose said firmly. And Preston, I've put Tiana in the blue guest room. Make sure she has everything she needs. Of course. Preston dried his hands on a dish towel. And I'll call the charter companies first thing in the morning to check on flights. Actually, Rose said, glancing between them with a thoughtful expression, why don't you show Tiana the sunrise from the east porch tomorrow morning? It's spectacular this time of year. Nana Rose, Preston said with a warning tone. What? I'm just saying if she's going to be here, she should see the best the ranch has to offer. Tiana yawned, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. I should probably get some sleep. It's been quite a day. Of course, honey, Rose said, immediately switching into caretaker mode. Preston, show her to her room. There are fresh towels in the bathroom and help yourself to anything you need. As they climbed the stairs, Tiana found herself marveling at the family portraits lining the walls. You have such a strong family resemblance, she said, stopping in front of a formal portrait of a young couple she assumed were Preston's parents. That was taken shortly before I was born, Preston said. My father always said I got my mother's smile and his stubborn streak. What were they like? Preston was quiet for a moment. My dad was completely devoted to the business, but he also made time for family. He taught me to ride, took me fishing, came to every school event. My mother she was the heart of everything. She could make anyone feel welcome, turn any gathering into a party. You miss them. Every day. But especially when I'm here, surrounded by all these memories. They'd reached the guest room, and Preston opened the door to reveal a comfortable space decorated in shades of blue and white, with a large window overlooking the front pasture. This is beautiful, Tiana said. Are you sure it's okay for me to stay here? Absolutely. And Tiana, thank you. For what? For tonight. For dinner conversation that wasn't about business deals or stock prices. For reminding me what it's like to just talk to someone. Tiana smiled. Thank you for not having me arrested for airplane theft. Preston laughed. The night's still young. As he turned to leave, Tiana called his name. Preston? Your grandmother is right, you know. About the sunrise. If it's half as beautiful as she says, I'd love to see it. Then I'll wake you up early, he said. Fair warning, Nana Rose considers anything after 6 a.m. to be sleeping in. After he left, Tiana sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. 24 hours ago, she'd been rushing between patients at the hospital, exhausted and stressed and focused entirely on other people's problems. Now she was in a guest room at a Texas ranch, having dinner with a millionaire and his grandmother, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. As she got ready for bed, she found herself thinking about Preston's question from earlier. Would it matter if he was broke? The honest answer was that she didn't know. But what she did know was that the man who'd helped her despite having no obligation to do so, who'd lit up when talking about his grandmother and his childhood memories, who'd listened to her talk about her work without seeming bored or dismissive. That man was someone she wanted to know better. Which was probably the most unexpected thing to happen in a day full of surprises. Tiana woke to the soft sound of rain against the window and the unfamiliar feeling of having slept for 8 straight hours. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the room too quiet, the absence of beeping monitors and hospital sounds too peaceful. Then she remembered. The wrong plane, Preston Hayes, the ranch, Nana Rose's incredible dinner. She checked her phone, 5:47 a.m., and 3 missed calls from her supervisor at the hospital. Her heart sank as she listened to the voicemails. Mrs. Rodriguez had indeed been upset about Tiana's absence, refusing to speak to the replacement nurse and insisting through her daughter that they postpone the surgery until Tiana could be there. "Great," Tiana muttered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "I've officially let down the one patient who needed me most." A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiral of guilt. "Tiana? It's Preston. Are you awake?" "Come in," she called, quickly finger-combing her curls and trying to look less like she'd been wallowing in self-recrimination. Preston entered carrying a steaming mug of coffee, already dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow looked both casual and expensive. "I brought you coffee and I have some news about flights." "Good news or bad news?" "Mixed. The good news is that the storm has passed. The bad news is that it did enough damage to the Atlanta airport that they're running limited flights, and everything's booked solid for the next 2 days." Tiana closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "So I'm stuck here until Thursday?" "It looks that way. But I've been thinking maybe we can make this work for you anyway." Preston sat down in the chair by the window, his expression thoughtful. "What if we could get Mrs. Rodriguez here instead?" "Here? To Dallas?" "Think about it. Dallas has some of the best cardiac surgeons in the country. If I made some calls, used some connections, I bet I could get her the same surgery here, probably with an even better surgeon than she would have had in Houston." Tiana stared at him. "You would do that? For a patient you've never met? Why not? You said she's been waiting months for this opportunity. If I can help make it happen faster and better, what's the downside?" "The downside is that it would probably cost a fortune, and she doesn't have insurance that would cover out-of-network treatment in Texas." Preston was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "What if cost wasn't an issue?" "Preston, no. I can't let you pay for a stranger's surgery." "Why not?" Because. Tiana struggled to find words. "Because that's not how the world works. People don't just randomly pay for expensive medical procedures for people they've never met. Maybe that's exactly how the world should work." Before Tiana could respond, Nana Rose's voice carried up the stairs. "Breakfast is ready. And Preston, you promised to show our guest the sunrise." Preston glanced at his watch. "We missed the sunrise by about an hour, but the morning view is still pretty spectacular. Come on, grab your coffee and let's go see." They made their way downstairs and out to the east porch, where Rose had already set up a small table with fresh fruit and pastries. The view was indeed breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with cattle and horses, all under a sky that was clear blue after the previous night's storm. "Oh wow," Tiana breathed, settling into one of the rocking chairs. "I can see why you love it here." "It's different from the city," Preston said, sitting beside her. "Quieter. Simpler." "Preston tells me you might be staying with us a bit longer," Rose said, emerging from the house with a plate of scrambled eggs. "I have to say I'm delighted. It gets lonely out here with just me and the ranch hands." "About that," Tiana said. "Preston had this idea about flying my patient here for her surgery, but it's too expensive and complicated and—" "Nonsense," Rose interrupted. "If Preston wants to help someone, let him help someone. Lord knows he has the resources and it might do him some good to use them for something meaningful." "Nana Rose," Preston said with a warning tone. "What? It's true. When was the last time you used your money for something that actually mattered to you personally?" Tiana looked between them, sensing another layer to their ongoing tension. "What does she mean?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pasture. "My grandmother thinks I'm too focused on making money and not focused enough on making a difference." "Are you?" The direct question caught him off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean, are you focused on making money or are you focused on making a difference?" Tiana's voice was gentle but persistent. "Because those don't have to be mutually exclusive." Rose beamed at her. "I like this girl." "It's complicated," Preston said finally. "The company has shareholders, employees, obligations. I can't just make decisions based on what feels good." "But you can make some decisions based on what feels right," Rose said. "Like helping a scared woman get the surgery she needs." Tiana set down her coffee cup. "Can I ask you both something? Preston, if you could design your ideal life, what would it look like? And Rose, what do you think Preston would be happiest doing?" "That's easy," Rose said immediately. "He'd be teaching. Maybe business or economics, but at a university where he could work with young people, help them figure out their futures. He's brilliant with numbers and strategy, but he's also good with people when he lets himself be." Preston looked surprised. "Teaching? I never said anything about teaching." "You didn't have to. I watched you explain compound interest to the pastor's grandson last Christmas. Your whole face lit up when the boy finally understood the concept. Rose turned to Tiana. What about you? What would your ideal life look like? I'd have my own clinic, Tiana said without hesitation. Somewhere in an underserved community, where I could provide comprehensive care and take time with each patient. Maybe with a teaching component too, training new nurses in compassionate care. See? Rose said triumphantly. You both want to help people learn and grow. You're more alike than you think. Preston studied Tiana's face. A clinic? Have you looked into what that would take? I've done some research, but it's overwhelming. The startup costs, the regulatory requirements, finding qualified staff who'd work for what I could afford to pay. Tiana shrugged. Right now it's just a dream. Dreams are how everything important starts, Rose said firmly. Preston's father used to say that businesses are just dreams with business plans. Preston's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with a frown. I'm sorry, but I need to take this. It's about the Dallas meetings. As he walked to the other end of the porch to take the call, Rose leaned closer to Tiana. Can I tell you something, honey? Of course. I haven't seen Preston this animated in years. He's been going through the motions of his life for so long, I was starting to worry he'd forgotten how to actually live. I'm sure he's just being polite to a house guest. Rose smiled. Honey, I've known that boy his whole life. He's many things, but fake isn't one of them. He likes you. We just met yesterday under bizarre circumstances. He doesn't even know me. Sometimes knowing someone isn't about time, it's about recognition. Rose rocked gently in her chair. You see him as a person, not as a business opportunity. That's rarer than you might think in his world. Preston finished his call and rejoined them, his expression troubled. I'm sorry, but I need to cut our morning short. There's a problem with one of our development projects, and I need to be in downtown Dallas by noon. Of course, Tiana said, standing up. I should call the hospital anyway, update them on my situation. Actually, Preston said, I was hoping you might come with me. To the city, I mean. I could show you around a bit, and maybe we could look into the logistics of bringing Mrs. Rodriguez here for her surgery. Tiana hesitated. I don't want to be in the way of your business. You won't be. And honestly, after last night and this morning, I'd like to spend more time talking to someone who sees the world differently than I do. Rose practically pushed them both toward the house. Go on, both of you. Explore the city, solve problems, have adventures. I'll be here when you get back. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for Dallas, Tiana found herself looking forward to seeing the city through Preston's eyes. She was also curious about his business. Meetings. What was it like to make decisions that affected large amounts of money and lots of people's jobs? But mostly she was curious about Preston himself. The more time she spent with him, the more she sensed there was a gap between who he was and who he thought he was supposed to be. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she wanted to help him figure out how to bridge that gap. Even if it meant staying in Texas longer than she'd ever planned. The drive back to Dallas gave Tiana her first real look at Texas in daylight. The landscape was bigger and more varied than she'd expected, not just the flat plains she'd imagined, but rolling hills, thick forests, and wide skies that seemed to stretch forever. It's beautiful, she said, watching a hawk circle overhead. I never realized Texas was so green. Most people think it's all desert and oil wells, Preston said. But this part of the state is pretty lush, especially after a good rain. They were driving through the heart of Dallas now, and Tiana was struck by the mix of gleaming skyscrapers and tree-lined neighborhoods. It felt more manageable than Atlanta somehow, less overwhelming. So what's this meeting about? She asked as Preston navigated through downtown traffic. We're developing a mixed-use complex in East Dallas. Retail, office space, and residential. But we've hit some snags with the community approval process. What kind of snags? Preston was quiet for a moment. The residents are concerned that our development will price them out of their neighborhood. They're not wrong. And you're going to do it anyway? It's complicated. The development will bring jobs and investment to an area that needs both. But yes, it will also likely raise property values and cost of living. Tiana thought about this as they pulled into the parking garage of a glass tower that stretched at least 40 stories into the sky. Have you talked to the residents? Like actually sat down with them and listened to their concerns? We've had public hearings, but... Preston trailed off as they got into the elevator. But those aren't really conversations. They're presentations where we tell people what we're planning and they tell us why they hate it. The elevator opened onto the 32nd floor, revealing a reception area that was all marble and polish and expensive art. The receptionist, a woman about Tiana's age with perfect makeup and a designer suit, brightened when she saw Preston. "Mr. Hayes, your team is waiting in conference room A. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Coffee would be great, thanks. And could you get the same for my guest?" Preston gestured to Tiana. "This is Tiana Johnson." The receptionist's smile became slightly more forced as she took in Tiana's simple dress and cardigan. "Of course. Right this way." Conference room A was dominated by a massive table surrounded by men in expensive suits, all focused on laptops and folders full of documents. They stood when Preston entered, and Tiana felt suddenly out of place in this world of business deals and profit margins. "Gentlemen, this is Tiana Johnson," Preston said. "She's visiting from Atlanta. Tiana, this is my development team." The introductions were polite but brief, and Tiana could tell the men were eager to get down to business. "I can wait outside," she offered. "Actually," Preston said, "would you mind staying? I'd be curious to get your perspective." For the next hour, Tiana listened as the team discussed zoning laws, construction timelines, and profit projections. But what struck her most was how rarely they mentioned the actual people who lived in the neighborhood they were planning to change. "The residents are being unreasonable," one of the men was saying. "They want all the benefits of development without any of the changes that come with it." "What benefits are you promising them?" Tiana asked quietly. The room fell silent and all eyes turned to her. The man who'd been speaking looked confused. "I'm sorry? You said they want the benefits without the changes. What benefits are they getting from your development?" "Well, jobs. Economic growth. Improved infrastructure." "What kinds of jobs? Are they jobs that people in the neighborhood are qualified for? Do they pay enough for someone to afford the increased rent that comes with economic growth?" Preston watched with interest as his team struggled to answer her questions. It was clear they'd never considered these issues from the residents' perspective. "The market will adjust," another team member said dismissively. "It always does." "The market adjusting means people getting pushed out of their homes," Tiana said, her voice calm but firm. "Where are they supposed to go?" "That's not really our responsibility," the first man said. "We're a business, not a social service agency." "But couldn't you be both?" Tiana looked around the table. "I mean, what if you design the development to include affordable housing? Or job training programs? Or spaces for local businesses that are already part of the community?" The team exchanged glances and Tiana could tell they thought she was being naive. But Preston was leaning forward, his expression thoughtful. "Those are interesting ideas," he said slowly. "What would that look like practically?" "I don't know the real estate business," Tiana admitted. "But in healthcare we've learned that prevention is usually cheaper and more effective than treatment. Maybe preventing displacement is cheaper than dealing with the community opposition you're facing now." After the meeting, Preston was unusually quiet as they left the building. They walked several blocks before he finally spoke. "You made my team very uncomfortable in there." "I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have said anything." "No, you should have." They needed to hear those questions. Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. "I needed to hear those questions." They were standing in front of a small park in the middle of downtown, where office workers were eating lunch on benches under the trees. It was the kind of green space that made a city feel more human. "Can I ask you something?" Preston said. "Sure. When you were talking about your ideal clinic earlier, you said you'd want it in an underserved community. Why?" Tiana sat down on an empty bench and Preston joined her. "Because that's where the need is greatest. I've seen what happens when people can't afford basic healthcare. Small problems become big problems, treatable conditions become life-threatening emergencies. But wouldn't it be easier to open a clinic in a wealthy area, where people can pay for services?" "Easier maybe. But not meaningful." Tiana watched a group of children playing on the playground nearby. "I didn't become a nurse to take care of people who already have lots of options. I became a nurse to help people who don't." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "You know, I've never thought about business that way. As a way to help people who don't have options. But you could. That development project, for example. What if instead of just building luxury condos and chain stores, you created something that actually served the community that's already there? It would be more complicated. Probably less profitable in the short term. But maybe more sustainable in the long term? And definitely more meaningful." Preston's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced at it with a frown. "It's from Nana Rose. She wants to know if we're planning to be back for dinner because she's making pot roast." Tiana smiled. "She really loves taking care of people, doesn't she? It's what makes her happy. She says there's no point in having resources if you don't use them to make life better for the people you care about." Smart woman. She'd like you, Preston said. Actually, she already does. She texted me this morning to say I should hold on to this one, because she's good for me. Tiana felt her cheeks warm. She doesn't even know me. She's a pretty good judge of character. Comes from years of managing ranch hands and dealing with my teenage rebellion. You? Rebellious? I find that hard to believe. Preston laughed. I went through a phase where I wanted to be a rodeo cowboy instead of a businessman. Drove my father crazy. What happened? Reality. Broken ribs, a concussion, and a very stern lecture from Nana Rose about using my brain instead of just my courage. As they walked back toward the car, Tiana found herself thinking about the meeting she'd just witnessed. The casual way Preston's team had dismissed the concerns of an entire community had bothered her, but what bothered her more was the sense that Preston himself wasn't entirely comfortable with their approach. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they got into the car. Of course. In that meeting, when your team was talking about the residents being unreasonable, you looked like you disagreed with them. Preston started the engine but didn't immediately put the car in drive. I did disagree with them. But I wasn't sure how to articulate why. And now I'm thinking maybe we need to go back to the drawing board. Figure out how to do development that actually serves the community instead of displacing it. That's going to make your team unhappy. Probably. But you know what? I'm tired of making decisions based on what makes my team comfortable instead of what makes sense. As they drove back toward the ranch, Tiana realized something had shifted during the day. She was still stranded in Texas, still worried about Mrs. Rodriguez, still completely out of her element in Preston's world of high-stakes business deals. But she was also starting to see possibilities she hadn't noticed before, ways that her values and his resources might complement each other. And judging by the thoughtful expression on Preston's face as he navigated the highway toward home, she suspected he was starting to see possibilities too. The question was what they were going to do about them. The next morning, Tiana woke to the sound of voices outside her window. Looking out, she saw Preston talking with an older man in work clothes near the barn, their heads bent over what looked like architectural plans. By the time she made it downstairs, Preston was already in the kitchen with Nana Rose, drinking coffee and looking more relaxed than she'd seen him yet. "Good morning," she said, accepting the mug Rose pressed into her hands. "What were you looking at outside?" "Plans for the community center," Preston said. "I called the team last night and told them we're redesigning the East Dallas project." "Really? How did that go over?" Preston grinned. "About as well as you'd expect. But I'm the boss, so they'll adapt." Preston stayed up until 2 in the morning researching community center development, Rose said proudly. "I found him asleep at the kitchen table with his laptop." Tiana raised an eyebrow. "You're really serious about this?" "You made some good points yesterday. I started thinking about what my father would have done, what kind of legacy I want to leave." Preston set down his coffee mug. "I also made some calls about Mrs. Rodriguez. And? Dr. Patricia Williams at Dallas Presbyterian is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the Southwest. She's agreed to consult on the case if we can get Mrs. Rodriguez here." Tiana's heart jumped. "Preston, I told you. Just hear me out. I spoke with a medical transport company that specializes in cases like this. They can have Mrs. Rodriguez and her daughter here by tomorrow evening, with a full medical team to monitor her during the flight. The cost is not Mrs. Rodriguez's problem." Preston's voice was firm. "I've already arranged everything. The surgery, the hospital stay, follow-up care. It's handled." Tiana stared at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because you care about her. Because she needs help and I can provide it. Because maybe it's time I used my resources for something that actually matters." Rose beamed at both of them. "I'm so proud of you, Preston." Tiana felt tears prick at her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me coordinate with the medical team. Say you'll be here when she arrives so she has a familiar face." Of course I will." Preston's phone rang and he glanced at the caller ID. "I need to take this, it's Dr. Williams." As he stepped onto the back porch to take the call, Rose turned to Tiana with a knowing smile. "That boy is smitten with you." "Rose, we barely know each other." "Honey, I've been watching people fall in love for 85 years. Trust me on this one. It's not about love. He's just being kind. Preston is always polite, but he's not always kind. There's a difference." Rose refilled Tiana's coffee mug. "Kindness comes from the heart. And his heart is definitely engaged where you're concerned." Before Tiana could respond, Preston returned with a smile on his face. "Good news?" Dr. Williams has reviewed Mrs. Rodriguez's case files and thinks she's an excellent candidate for a minimally invasive procedure. Better outcomes, faster recovery time. That's wonderful. Tiana felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. When will she arrive? Tomorrow evening. Which gives us today to show you around Dallas properly. Preston grabbed his keys from the counter. I thought we could start with the Arts District, then maybe grab lunch somewhere that's not a business meeting. The Dallas Arts District was unlike anything Tiana had expected. Block after block of museums, theaters, and galleries, all connected by tree-lined walkways and public spaces where people sat reading or eating lunch. This is incredible, she said as they walked through the sculpture garden outside the Dallas Museum of Art. How long has all this been here? The district has been developing for about 20 years, Preston said. It's one of the few development projects I'm actually proud to have been involved with. You worked on this? My father's company did some of the early planning. The idea was to create cultural spaces that would serve the whole city, not just wealthy art collectors. They spent the morning wandering through the museum, and Tiana was struck by how knowledgeable Preston was about art. He could explain the historical context of paintings, the techniques used in sculptures, the cultural significance of various pieces. How do you know so much about art? She asked as they stood in front of a stunning Georgia O'Keeffe painting. My mother was an art history major. She used to take me to museums when I was little, teach me to really look at things instead of just glancing at them. Preston's voice was warm with memory. She said art was one of the ways people connect across time and culture. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. She would have loved this place. Preston gestured around the gallery. And she would have loved meeting you. Why do you say that? Because you see things the way she did. You look past the surface to what really matters. They had lunch at a small restaurant in Deep Ellum, an area that Preston explained had once been a thriving music district, then declined and was now being revitalized by a mix of artists, small businesses, and careful development. This is the kind of development that actually works, he said as they walked past murals and galleries and local shops. It builds on what's already here instead of replacing it. Is this what you want to do with the East Dallas project? Something like this, yeah. Preserve the character of the neighborhood while adding resources and opportunities. As they explored the area, Tiana noticed how differently people responded to Preston here. Away from his office building and expensive suits, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, he seemed more approachable. Several people nodded hello and a few stopped to chat. You know a lot of people here, she observed. I come here sometimes when I need to think. There's something about being around artists and musicians that puts business problems in perspective. They were walking past a small community health clinic when Tiana stopped abruptly. Can we go in here for a minute? Of course. The clinic was busy but organized, with a waiting room full of families and individuals of all ages. The staff moved with the kind of efficient calm that Tiana recognized from her own work environment. Can I help you? Asked a woman at the front desk. I'm a nurse from Atlanta, Tiana said. I was just curious about your setup here. Oh, wonderful. Dr. Ramirez loves talking to visiting medical professionals. Let me see if he's available. Dr. Ramirez turned out to be an energetic man in his 50s who was passionate about community-based healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, he gave them a tour of the facility, explaining how they provided comprehensive care to an underserved neighborhood. The key, he said, is making healthcare accessible in every sense. Not just affordable but culturally appropriate, linguistically accessible, and integrated with other community services. Integrated how? Preston asked. We have social workers who help with housing issues, nutritionists who teach cooking classes, even a lawyer who comes in once a week to help with immigration paperwork. Health problems are rarely just medical problems. As they left the clinic, Tiana was quiet and thoughtful. That's exactly what I want to do, she said finally. That kind of comprehensive care. Why couldn't you do it? Money mostly. And expertise. I know nursing, but I don't know business or real estate or community organizing. Preston stopped walking. But I do. What? I know business and real estate. And apparently, I'm learning about community organizing. He turned to face her fully. What if we partnered on this? Your medical expertise, my business knowledge? Tiana stared at him. Preston, you can't be serious. Why not? You said yourself that healthcare and business don't have to be mutually exclusive. This could be a proof of concept. Because we live in different states. Because we just met 3 days ago. Because you're a millionaire and I'm a nurse who has student loan debt. Those are logistics, not impossibilities. Before Tiana could respond, Preston's phone buzzed with a call from the hospital. Mrs. Rodriguez was arriving earlier than expected. As they hurried back to the car, Tiana's mind was spinning. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been getting enough sleep between shifts. Now she was standing in Dallas, talking about starting a business with a man she'd met by accident, while coordinating care for a patient whose surgery was being paid for by that same man's generosity. Either this was the beginning of something wonderful, or she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Possibly both. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at Dallas Presbyterian Hospital looking small and nervous in the wheelchair, her daughter Carmen walking beside her with a protective hand on her shoulder. When she saw Tiana waiting in the lobby, her whole face transformed with relief. "Enfermera Tiana," she called out, using the Spanish word for nurse that had become Tiana's nickname in the ICU. Tiana knelt beside the wheelchair and took Mrs. Rodriguez's hands in hers. "Hola, señora. ¿Cómo se siente? How are you feeling?" "Mejor ahora que estás aquí," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "Better now that you're here." Preston watched from a respectful distance as Tiana spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez and Carmen in rapid Spanish, translating information from the medical transport team and helping them get settled. Her competence in this environment was remarkable. She seemed to know exactly what questions to ask, exactly how to make the scared woman feel safe. Dr. Williams appeared and introduced herself, and Tiana smoothly facilitated the conversation, translating medical terms and making sure Mrs. Rodriguez understood every aspect of her upcoming procedure. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Dr. Williams explained. "It's minimally invasive, so recovery time should be significantly shorter than the procedure she was originally scheduled for in Houston." After Mrs. Rodriguez was settled in her room, Carmen pulled Tiana aside. "Enfermera, I don't understand. How did we get here? Who is paying for all this?" Tiana glanced at Preston, who had been quietly handling logistics with the hospital staff. "It's complicated. But the important thing is that your mother is getting the best possible care. But the cost is not something you need to worry about," Preston said gently, joining their conversation. "I'm Preston Hayes. I'm just glad we could help." Carmen studied his face. "Why would you help strangers?" Preston looked at Tiana, then back at Carmen. "Because sometimes you meet someone who changes how you see the world. Your mother is lucky to have Tiana as her nurse, and Tiana cares about your mother. That makes your mother important to me too." That evening back at the ranch, Tiana was unusually quiet during dinner. She'd been professional and efficient at the hospital, but Preston could tell the emotion of the day was catching up with her. "Mrs. Rodriguez is in excellent hands," he said as they sat on the front porch after Rose had gone to bed. "Dr. Williams is one of the best." "I know. And I can't thank you enough for making this possible." Tiana rocked slowly in her chair, looking out at the stars. "It's just, this whole situation is so surreal. A week ago I was worried about paying my rent. Now I'm sitting on a ranch in Texas while a millionaire pays for my patient's surgery. You're troubled by it. I'm grateful for it. But also, yes, troubled by it." Preston waited for her to continue. "In nursing school they teach you about professional boundaries. You care for your patients, but you don't get personally involved in their lives. You definitely don't arrange for wealthy strangers to pay for their medical care. Is that what you think is happening here? That I'm a wealthy stranger doing charity work?" Tiana looked at him. "Aren't you?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. 3 days ago you would have been right. I was exactly that, a wealthy stranger who might write a check to feel good about myself. But you're not a stranger anymore, Tiana. And this isn't charity. Then what is it? I don't know what to call it. Partnership? Investment in something meaningful? Preston ran a hand through his hair. "All I know is that watching you work today, seeing how much you care about Mrs. Rodriguez, it made me want to be part of something that matters. Your business matters. You employ people, you create economic opportunities. Do I? Or do I just move money around in ways that make more money?" Preston's voice was frustrated. "You asked me yesterday if I was focused on making money or making a difference. The honest answer is that until I met you, I'd never considered there was a difference." Tiana stopped rocking and turned to face him fully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my life has been small. Comfortable, successful, but small. I go to meetings, I make deals, I increase profit margins. At the end of the day, I'm not sure any of it matters to anyone except shareholders. And you want that to change?" "I want to matter. I want my work to mean something beyond making rich people richer." Preston leaned forward in his chair. "When I was a kid, before my parents died, my father used to talk about building things that would last, creating something that would make the community better. I think I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. It's not too late to find it again. Isn't it? I'm 34 years old and I've spent the last 12 years building a career around things I don't actually care about. Tiana reached over and touched his hand. Preston, 3 days ago you didn't even know Mrs. Rodriguez existed. Today you moved mountains to get her the best possible care. That's not the action of someone who doesn't care about anything. That's because of you. You made me see her as a person instead of just a case study. No, I didn't. I just gave you permission to see what was already there. Tiana's voice was gentle but firm. The capacity for compassion, for wanting to help, that's not something I could create in you. It's something you already had. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Preston spoke again. Earlier today when you were talking to Dr. Ramirez about the community clinic, your whole face lit up. I've never felt that way about any aspect of my work. Because you haven't found the right aspect yet. But it exists. I saw it when you were talking about redesigning the East Dallas project, when you were explaining the arts district. You care about creating things that serve people, not just profit. So what do I do about it? Tiana smiled. You start small. You take one project, maybe the East Dallas development, and you do it right. You involve the community, you create something that serves their needs, you prove that development can be about building up instead of tearing down. And if it fails? If it's not profitable enough to satisfy the board, then you'll have failed at something you actually believe in, instead of succeeding at something that doesn't matter to you. Preston laughed, but it was a sound of recognition rather than humor. You make it sound simple. Not simple. Just clear. There's a difference. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you talk about opening your own clinic, you light up the same way I did when I was talking about the development project. But you also look scared. Why? Tiana was quiet for a long moment. Because it's a big dream. And I've spent so long thinking it was impossible that I'm not sure I'd know how to handle it being possible. What if it didn't have to be impossible? Preston. I'm serious. What if we figured out how to make it work? Your expertise, my resources, a shared commitment to doing something meaningful. You keep saying that. But we barely know each other. Do we? Because I feel like I know the important things about you. I know you put other people first, sometimes to your own detriment. I know you see possibilities instead of obstacles. I know you make me want to be better than I am. Tiana felt her heart speed up. And what do you think you know about me? I know you're brilliant at what you do. I know you care more about helping people than about making money. I know you see potential in me that I'm not sure I deserve. And I know you're kinder than you give yourself credit for. I know you're capable of changing your entire business approach based on one conversation with someone you just met. I know you make me feel like my dreams might actually be achievable. The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to address directly. So what do we do now? Preston asked quietly. I don't know. But I think we figure it out together. As they sat together on the porch, surrounded by the vast Texas night, both of them felt like they were standing on the edge of something that could change everything. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected. But it was also, somehow, exactly right. Mrs. Rodriguez's surgery went flawlessly. Dr. Williams emerged from the operating room with a smile that immediately put Tiana and Carmen at ease. Perfect outcome, she announced. The valve replacement went smoothly, and her heart function looks excellent. She should make a full recovery. Tiana felt tears of relief running down her cheeks as she hugged Carmen, who was sobbing with gratitude. Preston, who had been quietly waiting in the family lounge, watched the scene with a profound sense of satisfaction he'd never experienced in any boardroom. Can we see her? Carmen asked. She's in recovery now, still groggy from anesthesia. Give us about an hour and then you can visit for a few minutes. As Dr. Williams left, Carmen turned to Preston with tears in her eyes. Senor Hayes, I don't know how to thank you. My mother? She was so scared about the surgery, about the cost, about everything. But you made it possible for her to have the best care with her favorite nurse by her side. I'm just glad we could help, Preston said. Your mother is lucky to have such a devoted daughter. And such a devoted nurse, Carmen added, smiling at Tiana. Infirmera, my mother talks about you all the time. She says you explain things so she understands, you remember details about her life, you treat her like family. She is like family, Tiana said simply. Later, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria while Mrs. Rodriguez slept peacefully under the careful watch of the cardiac ICU nurses, Preston and Tiana finally had a chance to talk privately. How are you feeling? Preston asked. Relieved. Grateful. A little overwhelmed. Tiana stirred her coffee absently. Preston, what you did for Mrs. Rodriguez, it's going to change her life. Carmen was telling me that they've been saving money for this surgery for 3 years, working extra jobs, cutting every possible expense. And now they don't have to worry about that anymore. But here's the thing that's really getting to me: there are thousands of people in Mrs. Rodriguez's situation. People who need medical care they can't afford, who are one health crisis away from financial ruin. Tiana looked up at him. What you did was beautiful and generous, but it's also a band-aid on a much bigger problem. Preston nodded slowly. You're thinking about systemic change instead of individual charity. Exactly. And that's where your idea about the clinic comes in. What if we could create a model that made quality healthcare accessible to people like Mrs. Rodriguez without requiring a wealthy benefactor to step in? Tell me more about what you're thinking. Tiana pulled out her phone and opened a notes app where she'd apparently been sketching ideas. I've been thinking about this since we visited Dr. Ramirez's clinic. What if we created a comprehensive healthcare center that combined medical services with community resources? Sliding scale fees based on income, multilingual staff, integrated social services. That sounds like exactly what you described wanting to do. But here's the thing: it also sounds like a business opportunity. Not in a predatory way, but in a sustainable way. Tiana's eyes were bright with excitement. If we design it right, if we focus on preventive care and community health, it could actually be profitable while still serving people who can't afford traditional healthcare. Preston leaned forward, intrigued. How? Preventive care is cheaper than emergency care. Keeping people healthy costs less than treating them when they're sick. If we could create a model that focuses on wellness and early intervention, we could provide better outcomes at lower costs. And if the model works, it could be replicated in other communities. Exactly. One clinic becomes a proof of concept for a new approach to community healthcare. Preston was quiet for a moment, thinking. This sounds like it could work. But it would require significant upfront investment, probably 3 to 5 years before we'd see any return. Is that a problem? For most investors, yes. But for someone who's more interested in long-term impact than short-term profit. He shrugged. It could be exactly the right kind of project. Are you saying you'd be interested in actually doing this? I'm saying I'd be interested in exploring it seriously. Market research, financial modeling, location scouting. The whole process. Tiana stared at him. You're serious. I'm serious. But I'd want you to be a full partner, not just a consultant. This would be your vision, your expertise driving the medical side of things. I don't know anything about running a business. And I don't know anything about providing medical care. That's why it would be a partnership. Before Tiana could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from her supervisor at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. I should take this, she said, stepping away from the table. The conversation was brief but tense, and when Tiana returned, she looked troubled. Everything okay? Preston asked. They need me back at work. We're critically short-staffed, and they can't hold my position much longer if I don't return by Monday. Preston checked his phone. Today's Thursday. That gives us 3 days. 3 days for what? To figure out if this partnership idea is real or just a nice conversation over hospital coffee. Tiana looked at him for a long moment. You want to develop a complete business plan in 3 days? I want to develop enough of a plan to know if it's worth pursuing further. Market research, preliminary financial projections, potential locations. Preston's business mind was clearly engaged now. If we decide to move forward, you could give notice at the hospital and relocate to Dallas to work on this full-time. Relocate to Dallas? Tiana's voice was faint. Too fast. Maybe a little. But even as she said it, Tiana felt a flutter of excitement. Although, there's nothing really keeping me in Atlanta except my job. My brother's the only family I have there, and he's been encouraging me to take more risks, pursue bigger dreams. So let's do the research. Let's see if this crazy idea could actually work. Really? Really? But I have 2 conditions. Name them. First, if we do this, I want it to be a real partnership. Equal stakes, equal decision-making, equal investment of time and energy. Agreed. What's the second condition? We have to promise each other that if this doesn't work out, if we discover we're not compatible as business partners, it won't affect whatever this is between us personally. Preston looked surprised. I didn't realize you thought there was something between us personally. Tiana felt her cheeks warm. Well, isn't there? Yes, Preston said quietly. There definitely is. But I wasn't sure you felt it too. I feel it. I just don't want to complicate it with business considerations. Then we keep them separate. Business decisions based on business criteria, personal decisions based on personal feelings. Deal? Deal. As they shook hands across the cafeteria table, both of them felt like they were committing to much more than a business partnership. They were committing to figuring out how two people from completely different worlds could build something meaningful together. It was ambitious and risky and possibly completely insane. But looking at Preston's face, seeing the excitement and determination there that matched her own, Tiana thought it might also be the best decision she'd ever made. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of research, phone calls, and planning sessions that stretched late into the night. Preston had transformed the ranch's library into a temporary business command center, with laptops, spreadsheets, and medical journals covering every surface. "Look at this," Tiana said, pointing to data on her screen. "East Dallas has one of the highest rates of uninsured residents in the city, but also one of the youngest populations. Perfect demographic for a preventive care model." Preston looked up from his financial projections. "And the real estate costs are manageable. I found 3 potential locations that would work for our needs, all in areas with good public transportation access." They'd fallen into an easy working rhythm, their different expertise complementing each other perfectly. Preston handled the business and financial aspects while Tiana focused on medical services and community needs, but they consulted each other on every major decision. "This could really work," Tiana said, leaning back in her chair. "I mean, on paper it all makes sense. Better than work, it could be revolutionary. A sustainable model for community healthcare that could be replicated nationwide." But even as they talked about the exciting possibilities, Tiana was struggling with a growing sense of unease. The more time she spent with Preston, the more she liked him both as a potential business partner and as a person. But the more she liked him, the more aware she became of the vast differences in their backgrounds and resources. "Preston," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you talk about investing in this clinic, what kind of numbers are you thinking about?" Preston consulted his notes. "Initial startup costs would probably be around $2 million, plus operating expenses for the first 2 years until we reach profitability. Call it $4 million total investment." Tiana felt her stomach drop. $4 million. Is that too much? We could scale back the initial scope if... "No, it's not too much for the project. It's too much for me." Tiana stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch's peaceful landscape. "Preston, $4 million is more money than I'll earn in my entire lifetime. How can we be equal partners when you're putting up all the money?" Preston was quiet for a moment. "We'd structure it so you earn equity through your work and expertise. Over time, you'd own an equal share of the business. But if it fails, you lose $4 million. "I lose, what?" "The opportunity cost of staying in Atlanta?" "Tiana, every business partnership involves different types of investment. You're investing your career, your expertise, your professional reputation. That's not nothing. It's not $4 million either." Preston closed his laptop and turned to face her fully. "What are you really worried about?" Tiana was quiet for a long moment, trying to articulate the fear that had been growing in her chest. "I'm worried that I'm falling for a fantasy. 3 days ago, I was a nurse from Atlanta with student loan debt and a dream I thought was impossible. Now I'm sitting in a Millionaire's library, planning a business that could change my entire life, and I'm falling for you. And that scares you. It terrifies me. Because what happens when the fantasy ends? When you realize that underneath all this excitement about the clinic and changing the world, I'm still just a working-class nurse who doesn't know anything about your world." Preston stood up and walked over to her. "Is that really what you think? That this is all fantasy? I don't know what to think. I don't know how to separate what's real from what's just adrenaline and proximity and the excitement of planning something together." Preston's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "I'm sorry, but I need to take this. It's my lawyer." As Preston stepped out to take the call, Tiana remained at the window, her mind churning. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, safely recovering in the hospital thanks to Preston's generosity. She thought about the clinic they'd been planning, and how it could help hundreds of people like Mrs. Rodriguez. She thought about the way Preston looked at her when she talked about her work, like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. But she also thought about the casual way he'd mentioned $4 million, like it was a normal amount of money to risk on a new venture. She thought about the ranch house, which was beautiful but also a reminder of the wealth and privilege that shaped Preston's entire worldview. She thought about his business meetings, where decisions affecting entire communities were made by men in expensive suits who'd never lived in those communities. When Preston returned from his call, his expression was grim. "Everything okay?" Tiana asked. "That was about the East Dallas development project. The community group has filed a lawsuit to stop construction." "Can they do that?" "They can try. My lawyer says their case is weak, but it will delay everything by months, maybe years." "And that's bad for your company?" Preston ran a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. The investors are getting nervous. The board is pressuring me to just abandon the community-focused design and go back to the original plan." "Which would mean displacing the residents." "Essentially, yes." Tiana felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. I need to talk to the team, review our options." "Our options?" "The company's options." But as soon as Preston said it, he realized how it sounded. Tiana's face went carefully neutral, and he could see her pulling back emotionally. "Right," she said quietly. "The company's options." "Tiana, that's not what I meant." "Isn't it? When it comes down to it, when there's real pressure from your board and your investors, you're still the guy who makes decisions based on what's best for business." "That's not fair." "You know I've been trying to change that approach." "I know you've been talking about changing that approach. But this is the first real test, and you're already talking about reviewing your options instead of standing firm on doing the right thing." Preston felt frustration rising in his chest. "It's not that simple, Tiana. I have obligations, responsibilities to employees and shareholders. I can't just make decisions based on idealism. And I can't base my future on someone who thinks doing the right thing is idealism." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Preston stared at her, seeing the disappointment in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. "You're right," he said quietly. "What?" "You're right. I was already looking for ways to compromise, to find a middle ground that would keep everyone happy. Instead of just doing what I know is right." Tiana searched his face. "And what do you know is right?" "I know that community deserves better than being displaced for profit. I know that if I can't convince my board to support a development project that actually serves the people who live there, then maybe I need a different board." "That could cost you your company." "Maybe. But you asked me earlier what I really wanted from my life, what would make me feel like my work mattered. I think I know now." "And what's that?" Preston looked at her steadily. "I want to build things that make the world better. Even if it's harder, even if it's less profitable, even if it means disappointing people who only care about quarterly earnings." "And the clinic?" "The clinic is exactly the kind of thing I want to build. With you, if you'll have me as a partner." Tiana felt tears prick at her eyes. "Preston, I want that too. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of getting in over my head. Of wanting something so much that I ignore all the reasons it might not work." She took a shaky breath. "Of falling in love with someone whose world I don't understand." Preston stepped closer to her. "What if I told you that you understand my world better than anyone I've ever met? What if I told you that the way you see possibilities instead of obstacles, the way you care about people as individuals instead of statistics? What if I told you that's exactly what my world needs?" "I'd say that sounds like something you think right now, but might not think when the business pressures get serious." "Then let me prove it to you." "How?" "Give me until Monday. Let me handle the East Dallas situation, show you that I can put principles before profit when it really matters. And if I can do that, will you consider staying in Texas? Will you consider building this clinic together?" Tiana looked into his eyes, seeing determination and something that looked like desperation. "And if you can't do it? If the pressure gets to be too much and you compromise? Then I'll drive you to the airport myself and wish you well back in Atlanta. Deal?" "Deal." But as they shook hands again, both of them wondered if they were making promises they might not be able to keep. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Tiana's mood as she sat in the ranch kitchen drinking coffee and trying not to watch the clock. Preston had left early for what he'd called the most important board meeting of my career, and Tiana was left with nothing to do but wait and worry. Mrs. Rodriguez was being discharged from the hospital that afternoon, and Carmen had insisted on cooking dinner at her apartment to thank Tiana and Preston for everything they'd done. But whether Preston would be there for dinner, whether he'd still be speaking to his board of directors by dinner time, remained to be seen. "Stop pacing, honey," Nana Rose said gently. "You're wearing a hole in my kitchen floor." "I can't help it. I hate not knowing what's happening. Preston's a good man. He'll do the right thing. I know he wants to do the right thing. But wanting and being able to are different things when you're dealing with millions of dollars and people's jobs." Rose poured herself a cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen table. Can I tell you something about my grandson? Of course. When he was 16, he wanted to quit school and work on the ranch full-time. Said he didn't see the point of learning about things that didn't matter to real life. What did you do? I made a deal with him. Spend one summer working 12-hour days on the ranch, and if he still felt the same way in September, I'd support his decision to drop out. And? Rose smiled. By the end of August, he was begging to go back to school. Turns out ranch work was harder than he'd imagined, and he'd gained new respect for education. But the important thing was that I let him figure it out for himself instead of just telling him what to do. I'm not sure I understand the parallel. Preston needs to figure out who he wants to be as a businessman and as a person. You can't make that choice for him, and neither can his board of directors. But you can trust him to make the choice that aligns with his values. What if his values aren't what I think they are? Then you'll know that too, and you can make your decisions accordingly. Tiana's phone buzzed with a text from Preston. Still in meeting. Will call you as soon as I can. By 3 o'clock, Tiana was seriously considering driving to Dallas just to have something to do with her nervous energy. When her phone finally rang at 3:47, she nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. Preston? It's over. His voice sounded exhausted but relieved. What happened? I told the board that we were redesigning the East Dallas project to include affordable housing and community spaces, even if it meant lower profit margins. I told them that if they couldn't support that direction, they could find a new CEO. Tiana's heart stopped. And what did they say? Half of them walked out. Oh, Preston. But the other half stayed. Including our biggest investor, who said he'd been waiting for someone to propose exactly this kind of socially responsible development. Really? Really? We're moving forward with the community-centered design. It'll take longer and make less money, but it'll be something we can all be proud of. Tiana felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. And your job? Secure. Turns out there are more people interested in sustainable, community-focused business practices than I'd realized. We might even attract new investors who specifically want to support this approach. Preston, that's incredible. It's just the beginning. Which brings me to my next question: how would you feel about staying in Texas permanently? What do you mean? I mean, I had our lawyer draw up partnership papers for the clinic. 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making authority, and a salary that starts immediately whether or not the clinic is profitable yet. You already did that? I told you I wanted to prove I was serious about putting principles before profit. This is me putting my money where my mouth is. And if I say no? Then I'll be disappointed, but I'll understand. And I'll still invest in opening a clinic with someone else, because you've convinced me it's the right thing to do. Tiana was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd said. Can I ask you something? Anything. When you were in that meeting, when they were pressuring you to abandon the community-focused design, what made you stick to your guns? Preston considered his answer. I kept thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez, and how scared she was about her surgery. And I thought about that neighborhood in East Dallas, and how scared those residents must be about losing their homes. And I realized that I couldn't live with myself if I prioritized profit over people's lives. And then I thought about you, and how disappointed you'd be if I compromised on something this important. Not because you'd judge me, but because you'd know I was betraying my own values. Preston? I know this is all happening fast, and I know it's a huge decision. But Tiana, I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. I want to build this clinic with you. I want to prove that business can be a force for good. And I want to see where this thing between us leads. Even though I'm just a nurse from Atlanta with student loan debt? You're not just anything. You're a brilliant, compassionate woman who sees possibilities where others see problems. You're someone who makes me want to be better than I am. And if you're willing to take a chance on this crazy plan, I promise you won't regret it. Tiana looked around Rose's kitchen, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. A week ago, she'd been focused on getting through each day, helping her patients one at a time, dreaming of changes she thought she'd never be able to make. Now she was being offered the chance to create exactly the kind of healthcare facility she'd always imagined, with a partner who shared her vision and had the resources to make it reality. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, what? Okay, let's do it. Let's open a clinic. Let's change how healthcare works. Let's see what happens. Preston's whoop of joy was so loud that Rose came running from the living room to make sure everyone was all right. That evening, at Carmen's apartment, they celebrated Mrs. Rodriguez's successful recovery and the beginning of what everyone agreed was a beautiful partnership. Mrs. Rodriguez, looking healthier than Tiana had seen her in months, insisted on making a toast in Spanish that Carmen translated as, "To new beginnings and the angels who make them possible." "She's talking about you," Carmen told Preston. "She says you're an angel disguised as a businessman." "I think she's got it backwards," Preston said, looking at Tiana. "I'm a businessman who's learning to be human, thanks to an angel disguised as a nurse." Later, as they sat on the porch swing at the ranch, watching the stars come out over the Texas sky, Tiana reflected on the incredible week that had changed everything. "You know," she said, "a week ago if someone had told me I'd be sitting on a ranch in Texas, planning to open a clinic with a millionaire I met by accident, I'd have thought they were crazy. And now I think maybe the best things in life are the ones you never see coming." Preston took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I love you, Tiana." "I love you too," she said without hesitation. "Which is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the craziest. Why can't it be both?" As they kissed under the wide Texas sky, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. It had taken a wrong turn at 30,000 feet to bring them together, but now they couldn't imagine being anywhere else. 6 months later, the Johnson Hayes Community Health Center opened its doors in East Dallas, serving over 200 patients in its first week. The center featured bilingual staff, sliding scale fees, integrated social services, and a partnership with the local community college to train new healthcare workers. Preston kept his day job running Hayes Industries, but the company's focus had shifted to sustainable, community-centered development projects that prioritized social impact alongside financial returns. They'd become a model for other firms interested in socially responsible business practices. And Tiana had never been happier. She was doing exactly the work she'd always dreamed of, with a partner who challenged her to think bigger and dream bolder than she'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the best journeys they'd learned were the ones that began with getting completely lost. Thank you so much for joining Tiana and Preston on their unexpected journey from a case of mistaken aircraft to building something beautiful together. Stories like this remind us that life's most meaningful chapters often begin with the most unexpected plot twists. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Tiana and Preston's whirlwind romance and business partnership? Have you ever had a moment where taking the wrong path led you to exactly where you needed to be? And if you were in Tiana's shoes, would you have taken the leap to stay in Texas and build the clinic with Preston?